This is the Fafsa walkthrough presented by Stand By Me NextGen's College Funding Project. Stand By Me is a partnership between the United Way of Delaware and the state of Delaware. And the College Funding Project is an initiative designed to help students and their families find ways to pay for college. Thank you for joining this presentation today. Over the next hour or so, we're going to be taking a look at the FAFSA, or the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, via a series of slides and screenshots. Let's get started. So again, the FAFSA, the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, is where the journey to college begins. It's the federal application that is used to collect demographic and financial information from students, and in many cases, their parents. It must be filed every year that aid is needed at fafsa.gov. There's also a mobile app called My Student Aid, which can be downloaded through the App Store and through Google Play. Now, pay attention to the website you are using if you're going to use the web-based version. You must make sure that you are using fafsa.gov. It is, again, a federal application, so you need to be using the federal site. There are sites out there that will allow you to do the FAFSA and submit it to the federal government, but they are going to charge you a fee to do it. You do not want to use those sites. Make sure you're on fafsa.gov. And if for some reason you are being asked for credit card or payment information for doing your FAFSA, you are on the wrong site. The FAFSA has been open since October 1st of this year. Is for the 21-22 cycle, and it's going to be using 2019 tax information. Now that's a lot of numbers. So the FAFSA is always going to open the October before the aid cycle for the year that you need aid. So for fall of 2021, FAFSA is going to open in October of 2020. For fall of 22, it's going to open in October of 21. And it's always going to ask for prior year tax information. So even though it's the 21-22 FAFSA, they want to see your 2019 tax information. Now, in any year, you're able to discuss with the financial aid office of a college if you've had a reduction in income or loss of a job from the required tax year to the current year. And we know that 2020 has been a tough year for many families. Many families have lost income. They have lost jobs. So this year will be no different. Colleges are going to be able to discuss any updated financial situations that may not be accurately reflected on the 2019 taxes. So no worries there if you had a loss of income or a loss of job. So at a minimum, to get federal student aid, you have to apply for admission at a school. To do the FAFSA, you don't have to have already applied anywhere, and you definitely don't have to be accepted anywhere. But being admitted to a school is the only way you're actually going to get any financial aid for school. And since you're going to be sending the FAFSA to schools, if you haven't already at least applied to those schools, they may not be able to do a whole lot with your FAFSA information until they have an application on file. So again, you don't have to be accepted or have even applied to a school to submit the FAFSA, but you have to be making sure that you're working on that process. And the FAFSA is only the first step in that process. There are going to be other documents, other requirements as part of the financial aid process at any school, and any outside funding programs, whether it's an outside grant or a private scholarship, they are also going to have their own requirements. So make sure, student, that you are asking questions of the financial aid office, of any funders or donors to your college journey. What do I need to be doing, and what is the timeline on that? And I'm going to be speaking to the student mainly. I'm going to be saying you a lot. I'm addressing the student because financial aid and the college process is really on the student. It's a family decision in a lot of cases, and parents, you can certainly be involved in those processes, and in most cases you have to be involved in the FAFSA process. But since the onus is with the student, I'm going to be addressing the student. If there's something particular that the parents need to be aware of, then I'm going to be addressing you specifically. So why do we have to submit this FAFSA every year? Well, the FAFSA is how we determine the student's eligibility for federal student aid. The federal student aid that students think of as financial aid is need-based. It's the Pell Grant. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. The Pell Grant is need-based. So in order to determine who has financial need and who is eligible for this money, you've got to do the FAFSA. That's how they calculate it. And they do that by calculating what's called the expected family contribution. So the FAFSA gathers the family's income and asset information to make this calculation to determine how much the family may be able to contribute to the cost of a student's education. We're going to talk a little bit more in depth about the EFC on the next slide. And again, the FAFSA does need to be submitted every year because your income situation, your asset situation could go up or down, and that would need to be reflected on the FAFSA to be able to accurately calculate the student's need. Now, the FAFSA does not collect information about your household expenses, your budget, or any special circumstances. So the EFC is going to calculate its number based on your income and your assets. It's not going to look at what that money is spent on. So as I said, if you've had a reduction in income or if you have outstanding medical expenses or otherwise, you'll be able to discuss that with the financial aid office at each school that the student is applying to be able to kind of overcome any issues you may face financially. The FAFSA also does not determine what specific aid will be awarded, nor does it determine how much specific aid will be awarded. Those decisions are up to the school based on things like course load and other, in some cases, other forms of aid. And the FAFSA does not serve as a loan application. While the FAFSA does make students eligible for federal student loans, there's a separate step in the process that the school will lay out for the student. So again, the expected family contribution, it's the amount that the government estimates that the student and or the parents should be able to contribute to the cost of education for the academic year. Again, we say should because this is not taking into account anything that the family is spending that money on. Now, it is going to be the same regardless of the school attended. So student, if you're thinking about Del Tech and if you're thinking about Harvard, the expected family contribution is going to be the same for each school. Now, it's not a bill. This isn't something that you have to pay in order for students to get federal student aid or to be able to attend the school. Again, it's just the amount that the government estimates the family can contribute to the student's education based solely on income and assets. Because again, this is how they're going to determine eligibility for need-based aid. So if a family has a high income, if a family has a lot of assets, or if the student has a high income or assets, then there is less financial need. And so other families that have greater need because they have less money, they have less assets, are going to have greater access to those funds. Now, don't fret, if you have a high EFC, but you don't have a lot of money available to provide for college, then there are non-need-based financial aid options, such as a federal student loan, or what's called a federal Parent Plus loan, which is a student loan taken out by the parents for the benefit of the student. And of course, there's always scholarships, which we're not going to talk a whole lot about in this presentation, but scholarships are definitely an option, some need-based, most merit-based, but it's an option that typically you don't have to repay. So what information are we going to need to complete the FAFSA? The very minimum, we're going to need the student's social security number. But in most cases, we're also going to need the parent's social security number because most high school seniors are going to be dependent on their parents according to the FAFSA. So we're going to need parental information as well, which we're going to talk more about in a little bit. FAFSA also does ask for the student's driver's license if the student has one. And even if the student does have a driver's license, this is one of the few questions on the FAFSA that you're able to skip. So this is not necessarily something you have to provide. It's just another layer of identity. If the student is not a citizen, but perhaps a permanent resident, then it's going to ask for their alien registration number. As I've alluded to, federal tax information is going to be needed, including the W-2, and the main form that it's going to draw from is the IRS 1040. So you're going to want to have your 2019 1040, any schedules, and then any W-2s, because even if you can use what's called the data retrieval tool, which again, we'll talk about later, there's still information on your tax return that is not going to be pulled over from the IRS website. Some other things you're going to need as far as finances. records of any untaxed income, such as child support received, interest income, veterans non-education benefits, things such as that. And then lastly, for both the parent and the student, you're going to need information about cash on hand, savings and checking account balances, any kinds of investments, stocks, bonds, CDs, money markets, including real estate that is not your own home. Maybe you have a rental property that you're earning income from, any 529 plans, and then if you own large businesses or investment farms, that information would need to be reported as well. So, steps in completing the FAFSA. You're going to want to create for the student and most likely a parent a federal student aid ID or an FSA ID. Parents, if you have been to college previously or if you have older children who have been to college prior to 2015, then you may be familiar with the FAFSA PIN number. Well, in 2015, the FSA ID was introduced to be a more secure version or an alternative to the PIN number. So if you don't have one, then you're going to need to create one. If you created an FSA ID for a child who's already been in college or for yourself, you are going to use the same FSA ID to complete your portion of your current senior's FAFSA. And student, you're going to want to create your own unique FSA ID. You can do that at studentaid.gov or right from the welcome screen of the FAFSA. We're going to see more about that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the FSA ID a little bit later. So once you've created that FSA ID, if it's possible or prudent for you to do that at the beginning, you're going to go to fafsa.gov. If this is the first time you're logging into the FAFSA, you're going to click Start Here. That's if you've not completed a FAFSA before, or if you're a student who's returning to college, but this is your first time working on this current FAFSA, you're going to go Start Here. If you've already begun work on the FAFSA and you're logging in to make to complete it, or if you've completed the FAFSA and you're logging in to make corrections, you're going to click Log In. Once you get to the welcome screen, which we'll see an example of in a few slides, you're going to click the Start 2021-2022 FAFSA to complete it for that academic year. Now, students, if you are planning on doing summer classes before your freshman fall, you are also going to want to do the 2021 FAFSA because the summer of 21 is going to fall into that aid cycle. So you would have to do both FAFSAs in that case. But if you are planning on starting as a freshman in the fall, you're only going to focus on the 21-22 FAFSA. Now, as you're going through the FAFSA, you must complete all sections of the FAFSA in order. You cannot jump around in a fresh FAFSA. You have to complete each section before you can move on. Now, you can save it if you get to a section where you're not comfortable finishing that section at that time or you don't have the information. You can save it and then return later. Once you have completed a FAFSA and you go in to make corrections, then you can jump around to different sections as needed. But starting out first time through, you have to complete it in order. And then once you complete the FAFSA, you're going to be getting a series of emails. You're going to get a confirmation page immediately, and then you're going to get emails alerting you to the status of your FAFSA. So it's a good idea to create a folder in your email to be able to put all these emails from FAFSA in one place, and also to create them for each of the colleges you are reaching out to. You will likely still get things in the physical mail, but increasingly schools are going digital. So your financial aid communications are likely going to be through email. Your communications with your teachers are going to be through email, and your communication with the federal government as far as your student aid is going to be through email. So because of that, we recommend not using your high school email to work on your college process, because once you graduate from high school, you are going to lose access to that email, and then you're going to lose access to all of your communications with federal student aid, with colleges and the like. So most all of us have a Gmail account from something we've signed up for. So use a Gmail account, use a Yahoo, a Hotmail, whatever personal email address you have, use that. If you don't have one, now would be the time to create a professional sounding email, maybe just using your name at gmail.com to be able to start having these communications come to you through that. So we're going to go ahead and jump into some screenshots of the 21-22 FAFSA. We're not going to look at every screen in the FAFSA. We're not going to discuss every question in the FAFSA, but we are going to try to hit the main screens, the main sections, and focus a little bit on some of the questions that tend to give people trouble. So let's jump into this. You get to the home page. You have the choice to choose English, which is the default language, or you can choose to complete the FAFSA in Spanish. Now you have to make the designation of Spanish before you log in, because once you've logged into the FAFSA, you cannot change the language designation unless you save the FAFSA, log out, and go back in. So if you start in English, but want to go to Spanish, you're going to have to log out and then change your language. If you accidentally start in Spanish, you're going to have to log out and go back, and English will be the default. So as I said earlier, if you're new to the FAFSA process, you're going to click Start Here. But if you are returning, you are going to click Returning User to correct info, to add a school, or to view your student aid report, which we're going to talk a little bit more about. Now, once you get to the login screen, you have two options once again. On the left-hand side, you can choose I am the student, which would be where you use your FSA ID, which we've discussed a little bit already. On the right-hand side, it says I am a parent, preparer, or student from a freely associated state. You can certainly use that to log in, but it can get a little confusing, and I'm going to explain why in a second. But we prefer and we recommend that if you're going to log into the FAFSA, that you have already created your FSA ID, or you create your FSA ID from right here. So this is where you would enter that username and password if you have it. You can see the circle there. If you don't have that username and password created, right above the blue circle, you can see the blue hyperlink that says create one. So you can go right there, create your FSA ID, and if your parent does not have their FSA ID created, you can create theirs as soon as you've completed yours, and then you both are ready to go. So student, you would log in here with your FSA ID, but maybe parent, you are going to log in on behalf of your student, either to get the FAFSA started or to update some information or to add the parental information that's required. If you have the student's FSA ID, then you're going to want to use that. You would click I am the student and use the student's FSA ID to log in for them. If you do not have the student's FSA ID for whatever reason, or the student hasn't created it, then you can click I am the parent, but you must enter the student's identifying information, not your own. I have had students click, oh, I'm the parent, I'm going to enter my information to log into my student's FAFSA. But that would be creating a FAFSA for you if you are continuing your education. So even if you click I am the parent, you can see where it says the student's first name, the student's last name, social, and birthday. So make sure that you are entering the student's information, not your own, because again, the student has the onus of this process. The financial aid is going to be for them, and so it is going to be in their name. So again, I've alluded to this. There will be two financial aid year options, 21-22 and 2021. If you are taking summer classes, then you're going to want to do both of these because they will be two different aid cycles. But if you are planning on starting in the fall of 21, you only need to do the 21-22 FAFSA. So once you've selected your FAFSA, it's going to prompt you to create a save key. Now a save key is a digital bookmark, and it allows you to return to a specific point in the FAFSA where you left off in your last session if you did not complete the FAFSA. Does not have to be super secure. We still recommend, once you've come up with a save key, writing it down with your FSA ID information and then saving that somewhere securely, whether you save it as a document in a drive or a Google Drive or a cloud drive, or whether you take a picture of it and then do the same. Make sure that you are saving this information because you are going to need the FSA ID student to log into the FAFSA and sign it every year. Parents, as long as the student is considered dependent, you are going to need that FSA ID to complete your portion. And students, even after you are done with college, if you've taken out student loans or anything like that, you're still going to need that FSA ID. So make sure you keep it secure. But this save key doesn't have to be elaborate. If you forget your save key, it asks for your zip code to help you be able to reset it. So I just tell students, just use your zip code because that's how you're going to unlock it if you forget it. But again, just a digital bookmark will drop you off where your last point of exit was. Introduction page, you can really skip through this. Each of these gray tabs you can click and it will give you a little blurb of information related to that question. But unless you really want to read it, you can just skip right through it. No harm, no foul. Now, there are 8 sections of the FAFSA that we are going to be looking at. Again, not looking at every question, not looking at every screen. We're just going to hit the biggies. But we're going to look at student demographics, which is the first section, followed by school selection, where the student is going to identify the high school that they plan on graduating from, and will be able to begin selecting colleges which the FAFSA will go to and be processed by. Dependency status, again, to determine if the student is dependent or independent. Most high school seniors are going to be dependent students. If the student is dependent, then we move on to parent financial or parent demographics and parent financials. Then student financials, which will be the same questions that were asked of the parent. Then we sign and submit it, and then there is a confirmation screen. So let's take a look at the student demographics. So if you create your FSA ID first, then a lot of the information is going to be transferred over. If you wait to create the FSA ID until later, you're going to have to enter the same demographic information 2 times. So we recommend, again, just for ease of entry into the FAFSA, create the FSA ID at least for the student first, but it's also going to cut some of your typing work in half. Now, these demographics questions are pretty simple, but if you do get stuck on a question, you're not quite sure what it's asking, you're not quite sure how to answer it, these little blue question mark bubbles are called tooltips. If you click on it, it will bring up a little blurb clarifying that question, and they appear on just about every question in the FAFSA. So if you get stuck, that's designed to help you hopefully get unstuck. Now, as you're navigating through the FAFSA, it's kind of a habit that we have of, if you want to do something on the computer, you hit enter to make it happen. You don't want to do that on the FAFSA. If you click enter on your keyboard to move forward, it's likely going to kick you out. We don't know why that does that. It's been a glitch for years, but if you hit enter, probably going to kick you out. Now, your information will likely save, but it may have saved the previous page and not the page you were on. So anytime you want to move forward or backward in the FAFSA, make sure you're clicking next or previous. Don't use the enter key. Don't use your browser bar. Make sure you're only clicking next and previous. More demographics questions asking about the student's high school completion status, when they begin college. So again, your student's not going to have been graduated from high school yet if they're a current senior. So you're estimating or looking ahead to what they're going to have. And then, of course, it's going to ask, what do you think that your degree level is going to be when you start, things like that. And then the question that most people get hung up on is, are you interested in being considered for work study? Work study is one of the 3 parts of federal financial aid, federal student aid. It is Pell Grant, which is the free money, which most students consider to be the financial aid. Student loans, which you must repay after your time in college is over. And then there's federal work study, which is need-based, and it's technically first come, first serve. So if a student would like to have a job on campus for a couple hours a week, working around their class schedule, and they get a paycheck to help with school expenses, living expenses, and if they're eligible for federal work study as determined by the FAFSA and the Financial Aid Office, they could potentially get a job if they've answered yes on the FAFSA. Now again, it's first come, first serve. So students who answer yes on the FAFSA to this question and are eligible are going to get first dibs. If you answer no or don't know and you are eligible and you go to financial aid later on and ask to be put on the list, you may have already missed out. So we just encourage all students to answer yes, that you are interested in work study, because if you are interested and you are eligible, then there's a chance for you to get a job. If you decide you don't want the job, you can turn it down and you're not going to lose financial aid. You just wouldn't get the paycheck that you otherwise would for work study. So we encourage students to say yes. It can only help, it can't hurt. So another demographic question that is only asked of the males is about selective service, otherwise known as the draft. It's federal law that most males, citizen and permanent resident, from 18 to 26 are required to be registered with the draft. Now, we've not had a draft since Vietnam, and we most likely will never have one again. But it's still on the books that if you are a male and you are between 18 and 26, if you want any kind of federal benefit, you have to be registered for the draft. And student aid, federal student aid, is considered a benefit of the federal government. So if you are older than 18 and you're not sure that you have registered for the draft, you can click no, and then the next question that come up will be, do you want us to register you? You can click yes, and it will automatically and immediately register you for Selective Service. If you are not yet 18, obviously you have not yet registered for Selective Service, so you can do the same. Click no, and then click yes, you want us to register you, and when you turn 18, it will register you automatically. Now, if you've got a good memory and you know that you filled out the card that came in the mail, or you've gone to the post office to sign up for the draft, then you can click yes and move on. But most students are not aware if they've done it, or they've forgotten whether they have. So in any case, it's usually easier to say, no, I've not done it, and yes, I want you to do it for me. And that way you don't lose out on the opportunity to have federal student aid. So next we move on to school selection. And as I said, first we're gonna check out the high school that you are hoping to graduate from. Hopefully you will. I should say planning to graduate from. It's probably a little bit more positive. You have a couple of options of how to do this. You could simply type in the information and move on to next, but most high schools in the country are in a database that the Fafsa can draw from. So if you enter the information and then click search, it will match it up to the information that's in the Fafsa database, and then you can click next. But in some cases, maybe you went to a small homeschool or a small private school and it's not in here. Never fear. If it doesn't find it, you can hit next and it will record what you typed in. In some cases, maybe you went to high school in a foreign country and it's not going to find it, but you can type in the name of the school, the city in the country, and then foreign country is an option. Other options in here are also various US territories. So lots of options for being able to record your high school. But again, if you can't find it in the search, then typing it in is sufficient. And then we get to the college section. You can list up to 10 colleges at one time on the FAFSA. You can definitely list more, but there's a process for it. So you put 10 schools on the FAFSA, but you've got another 10 schools that you're interested in as well. So you do the 10, you complete the FAFSA. Once it processes, you can log back in, go to make corrections, or from the main screen, you saw where it said add a school. You can go in, remove the original 10 schools, add 10 more schools, and then resubmit it. Those first 10 schools are not going to lose the information you've already submitted, but those second 10 schools will get the same information. So now 20 schools have your financial aid information, and then you can begin working with them on their additional processes and see who can give you the best deal. Now here's the downside. Let's say that you do that process and then you have to go in and make a correction of financials or demographics or anything, any correction. You're gonna have to do it in reverse. Make the correction for the 10 schools that are on there, submit it. Once it's processed, go back in, remove those 10, add in the original 10, and then resubmit it. So it's a bit of a process, but I have worked with a student already this year who was working on putting 20 colleges on her FAFSA. So you want to make sure that you've got the information correct if you're going to be adding more than 10 schools. So how do you do it? If you know the college's federal school code, which most people are not going to know that code off the top of their head, you can enter it that way. Or same as you did with the high schools, enter the state and the city or the school name. You don't have to enter both. And then here you would definitely have to search because again, it's got to tie it to a school code. So you enter that information, hit search, and if you've entered it correctly, it will find that school. Now, some schools that are similarly named, even in the same state, you're going to have to sort through them. Or a school that has various campuses, and those campuses will have different numbers. With Delaware Tech, there are 4 campuses of Delaware Tech, but they all have the same federal school code, so you're only going to come up with one option. But a school like University of California, University of New York, University of Pennsylvania, they have, even University of Maryland, they have multiple campuses. And so you're going to have to know which campus in which city you want to attend so that your financial aid gets to the specific school that you want to go to. Another screen that we don't have a screenshot for is once you have selected your schools, and say up to 10, the next screen asks you about your housing plans. And you have a drop-down menu. Do you plan to be on campus, off campus, or with parent? And then you can choose appropriately on that screen. So once you've selected the colleges that you want the FAFSA to go to, then we're going to look at dependency status. First question, is the student married? If they are, that's more than likely going to make them an independent student. But again, most high school seniors are not married. Now, if the student has children, that they are going to be providing more than half of that child's support, or if they have other dependents where they are providing more than half of the support, then that's going to make them potentially independent. Other things down here that could make a student independent, if they're serving on active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces, or if they're already a veteran of active duty, or if since the student was 13, the parents are deceased and that student was in foster care or has been a ward of the court, if the student is emancipated from their parents, or if somebody other than the legal parents have guardianship. These things would all make the student potentially independent. Also, if the student is homeless or in danger of being homeless, that could also make a student independent. But the majority of high school seniors are going to be dependent. So just because the student thinks they're grown, or just because the parent thinks the student is grown, doesn't mean the student is grown as far as the FAFSA and the federal government are concerned. So in most cases, students, you're going to click, I will provide information about my parents. Now the second option that says I am unable to provide parental information, that doesn't mean that you don't currently have it today, or you don't know it, or even that mom and dad are refusing to give it to you. That does not count as what is called a special circumstance. We're going to talk a little bit more about special circumstances in a bit. So again, in most cases, you're going to have to provide parental information. So I keep saying most cases, most high school seniors. Let's talk about parents and the FAFSA. So who is the legal parent on the FAFSA? Well, the legal parent is the biological or adoptive parent with whom the student lives more of the year. And this includes any individual listed as a parent on the student's birth certificate. Now, the following people are not the legal parents when completing the FAFSA, even if the student lives with this individual or individuals. Grandparents are not going to go on the FAFSA. Aunts, uncles, or other relatives, not going to go on the FAFSA, nor are foster parents or legal guardians. Now, if any of these people adopt the student and have legal custody, then yes, they become the legal parents. But unless there is a custody situation, then those people would not go on the FAFSA as far as parental information. So, do both legal parents have to provide information on the FAFSA? Yes, if they live together. Even if they're unmarried, but living together, then both parents would provide information. But if the legal parents are not living together, then the information has to be provided by the custodial parent, or the parent with whom the student lives more of the year. So you may say, and we've had cases where parents divorced say, well, we have joint custody, 50-50. Say, well, there's an uneven number of days in the year, so who does the student spend more time with? And say, well, they spend equal time. Then we say, this is not the official line, but go with the parent who makes less money, because the parent that makes less money, being the parent on the FAFSA, is going to help the student be eligible for potentially more federal student aid. Again, not the official line, but if you have to come up with a tiebreaker, that's the tiebreaker. Another thing that plays into that decision is if the legal parents are divorced and if the custodial parent has remarried, then information must be provided by that step parent. A lot of people don't agree with this, especially if the step parent is not providing any direct support to the student, or if the student no longer lives in that household, maybe they've moved out and doesn't live with either parent. But having just moved out of your parents' house does not make you independent as a student. So again, in this case, you may want to go, if custody had been 50-50, but now the student is technically an adult because they're 18, which parent makes less money? And it could very well be that single income household. May not always be the case, but that is something that the family is going to have to discuss and keep the best interests of the student in mind. Now, what if the parent or the student doesn't live with the legal parents and cannot obtain information from them? Again, not just because the student has moved out or is living on their own, but they maybe don't know where the parents are, or the parents are not permitted to have contact with the student. Then in this case, special circumstances may exist. And if this is the case, then the student has to contact the financial aid office at each school to which they're applying for admission and financial aid. The financial aid staff at the school may be able to override the dependency status so that the student does not have to provide information on the FAFSA. Now, parents, if you simply don't want to give your tax and demographic information to the student, they're still going to be eligible for financial aid, but it's only going to be an unsubsidized student loan. So student loans come in two parts or two types. There's a subsidized type where the government pays the interest while the student is in school, and there's an unsubsidized where the student is responsible for the interest that accrues. They don't have to pay the interest while they're in school, but any interest that's built up is going to be capitalized and dropped on top of the loan once it's time for repayment. So by parents not putting their information on the FAFSA, students lose any eligibility for need-based aid, whether it's the subsidized loan, which even though it's a loan, it's still a need-based loan, and they would lose out on any Pell Grant eligibility as well as other need-based aid from the federal government, such as the SEOG grant or any state aid. So a lot of parents say, oh, it's an invasion of my privacy, the government doesn't need to know this, or some parents are afraid that they're going to get audited through the FAFSA. That is not going to be the case. Providing parental information on the FAFSA is very secure, very safe, it's encrypted, secure website, so there's no need to worry about any kind of legal issue or any kind of privacy issue from the FAFSA by putting the information. It will hurt the student if the parent doesn't provide the information. So that's why we recommend, if at all possible, parents, please provide your information on the student FAFSA. Otherwise, they may not be eligible for a whole lot of financial aid. But again, students, if you don't have contact with your parents for one reason or the other, then the financial aid office can tell you what the process is for overriding that dependency status and hopefully making you an independent student. So you'd be eligible to the maximum amount of student aid that a student could get. So we're going to take a look at the traditional case, the dependent student with parental data provided, and then we're going to look very briefly at the setup, the lead-in to a dependent student without parental data provided. So the parent demographics, you list the marital status of, again, the legal parents. If legal parents are still married, you would choose obviously married. If the custodial parent has remarried, if the legal parents have divorced and the custodial parent has remarried, you're going to choose the same option, and the date would be the date of that remarriage. Again, you may need to provide both parents' information, even if they're not married, but if they are sharing the same house. But that would be maybe if they never got married. If parents have separated or divorced, even in a non-legal separation, mom or dad has just moved out of the house, that counts as the start of the separation, and then you'd only have to use the parent information, whom is the custodial parent. So it's relatively clear when you choose the option here what your status would be, and then you'd put in the parental information as needed. Pay attention to who you're putting as the first parent and the second parent if we're doing a two-parent household, because it will ask several more times for parent one or parent two information. So we recommend that if one parent is going to make an FSA ID, both don't need one, but if one parent has made one or will make one, make parent one the person with the FSA ID. So you always know when it comes time for filling in the FAFSA parent section or doing the data retrieval tool or signing the parent section, you always are going to choose parent one because they have the FSA ID. Now, let's say the parent does not have a valid social security number. Maybe they are undocumented. Now, you may have an ITIN number, a individual taxpayer identification number, but you would not use that on the FAFSA. If you do not have a valid Social Security number, you're going to put all zeros where it says parent Social Security number. But this also means that you cannot create an FSA ID. You're going to have an alternate method for signing the FAFSA, which we're going to talk about when we get to that part. So again, parent without Social Security number, going to put all zeros. At the end of the FAFSA, it's going to indicate that you made an error, but all you have to do is there's a button that says check for errors. You click it and it will override that error. Then after we put in parent demographics, we get to parent financials. The first thing is the parent tax filing status. It's going to ask if you've completed the 2019 taxes. It's going to say already completed, will file, or not going to file. And then you can choose appropriately. Again, they've moved the taxes to prior year. It used to be prior year. So in olden days, the 21-22 FAFSA would use 2020 taxes. But not everybody has their prior year taxes done when it's time to do the FAFSA. However, most people are going to have their prior year taxes done. So that's why we're looking 2 years back. But again, 2019 may have been a much better year for you than 2020 has been. And as I said, the schools can potentially override the EFC because of any current situations. So you're going to choose the appropriate one here, and you're going to choose the appropriate tax filing status. Now, parents who are married filed separately cannot use this data retrieval tool because you have two separate tax returns. But everybody else should be able to use this data retrieval tool. So you click on that, it says link to the IRS. It tells you a little bit about the data retrieval tool, and then you click link to the IRS, and it will take you to the IRS's secure website where you can enter your information and potentially pull your tax information over. Now, we don't have a screenshot of that, but I am going to talk a little bit about it. So again, the data retrieval tool, or the DRT, is where you can link to the IRS website when completing the FAFSA to pull over most of your tax information that's needed on the FAFSA. It's transferred electronically and safely. You're not even able to see what is transferred over. If it works, and it doesn't always work, it'll say transferred from the IRS. So you're not able to see anything, but you're also not able to accidentally change anything. But if you use the data retrieval tool, it's one less step in the process with the colleges because they're no longer going to need to see tax records aside from a W-2. Because you're still going to want to have your paper versions of your taxes, or if you file electronically, a PDF on your phone or on your computer or what have you, because not all of the information is going to transfer over. Specifically, any W-2 information is not going to transfer over. So it'll transfer the AGI, the adjusted gross income, but it's not going to bring over mom or dad's separate portion. You're going to have to enter that manually, as well as any pension or 401k additions off of your W-2. You'd have to enter that manually as well. And sometimes the data retrieval tool just doesn't work. It's very finicky. You have to enter your home address exactly as it appears on the 1040. And even that way, sometimes it doesn't work. So you're gonna wanna make sure that you have a copy of the taxes and the W-2s just in case the data retrieval tool is finicky. It's not always finicky, but more often than not, I have to cross my fingers and spit in my hat to make sure that it works. So if you are doing the FAFSA and you run into issues with anything, but in this case, the data retrieval tool, you can call the Department of Education at 1-800-4-FED-AID. Again, that's 1-800-4-FED-AID. That is the hotline for the FAFSA and for student aid. You can also contact us at Stand By Me. We've got our phone number there, which is 800-560-3372. Our website is down there at the bottom of every slide, so you can reach out to us at our website, which is standbymede.org. You can also, in a pinch, dial Delaware 211 on your phone, and that's the Delaware helpline, and you can simply ask for FAFSA completion assistance, and they will direct you to us, and we will get that request, and we will reach out to you and help you overcome any FAFSA issues you may have. We're also, I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, we also are offering one-on-one appointments on Zoom that you can log in and speak with one of our experts, and we can help you with any issues you have, any questions you might have, or even walk you through the entire FAFSA. So whether you use the data retrieval tool or not, you're going to have to fill some stuff in. If you don't use the data retrieval tool, then you're going to have to enter all the information that is being requested. Most of it is going to give you direction in the question itself about where to look in your tax records. If it doesn't, like some of these down here in the middle of the screen, you've still got those tool tips that you'll be able to click on, and it will guide you on how to answer that question. So like I said, even if you use the data retrieval tool, this first question here about how much did parent 1 make, how much did parent 2 make, you're going to have to enter that manually, because nowhere on your federal return does it separate spousal income. Now, let's say that you don't get a W-2, maybe you get a 1099 or something else, then you are going to leave your portion of this question blank. Only W-2 information is going to go here. So mom and dad, if you don't get a W-2, you're just going to put a 0 in your section of this question where it asks how much parent 1 or parent 2 made. And then of course you're going to go through and answer the other questions. Some of them are self-explanatory, some of them are 0 for 99% of the people that I've worked with. But again, if you get stuck, you've got the tool tip, and then of course you can reach out to student aid through the 1-800-4FED-AID number, or reach out to Stand By Me. So once you've completed the parent financials, one of the screens that we don't have a screenshot for also again asks about cash on hand, savings and checking account balances, any assets that you hold, including 529s, and then any business or farm income if you have a large business or an investment farm. Now, you want to use the FAFSA wording to your advantage, because those questions all say as of today. So we know that finances can change at a moment's notice. So if you have a lot of money in an account because you're saving up for something, we've had people this year already saving up for cars and down payments on homes. If the money's there, you should probably report it. But let's say you buy that car tomorrow, go back in after the FAFSA is processed and delete out the amount of money that you spent. The FAFSA is not one and done. You don't have to keep information the same or static on the FAFSA if it has changed. You can always go back into a processed FAFSA and change information as needed. And that can include financial and asset information. Not so much your taxes. Your taxes are not going to change unless you amend your taxes. But your bank account information, your asset information, business earnings information, that may change. So student financials are going to ask the very same questions as we just saw with the parent financials. But a lot of high school seniors, they're not filing their own taxes. They may be working, but they're not earning enough money to file a tax return. Student, you're being claimed on your parents' taxes. And parents, claiming a child on your taxes has no bearing on the FAFSA. So again, if we have a custodial situation, you may say, oh, well, my ex is claiming the child, so they need to put their information on. That's not necessarily the case. As we've said, it's got to be custodial, who has the child more often, or at the end of the day, who makes less money. So students, if you did not file taxes, you can move through this and answer the questions as needed to say that you did not file. But if you did earn income that's under the filing limit, there is a place for you to report that. And if you filed taxes, you're able to use the data retrieval tool just the same as the parents. So once you've made it through the financial section, you're going to get to the sign and submit section. Most likely, the FSA IDs are already going to be in here once you click on this provide student signature, provide parent signature, because student, you've most likely logged into the FAFSA with your FSA ID, and maybe you use the data retrieval tool. Parents, you've most likely used the data retrieval tool to pull your taxes over, and so when you go to click provide signature, all you're going to have to do is agree to the FAFSA terms, and your signature will already be there. Parents without social security numbers, you are not going to be able to sign the FAFSA digitally, because as you see, you have to sign it with the FSA ID. So parents, if you have yet to create an FSA ID, but you are able because you have a social security number, you'll be able to create it right here from the screen, as you can see. But again, parents without social security numbers are not going to be able to create an FSA ID and therefore can't sign the FAFSA electronically. But if you look at the bottom of the screen where we've got that black arrow, there is an option to sign in other ways. Parents, you could print out a signature page from the FAFSA. Student signature would not be needed because more than likely they have signed with the FSA ID. But parent, you would put your physical signature, the date that you signed, and just underneath of that is an address which you'll send this form to. Now, FAFSAs that are submitted without parent signatures, in my experience, take 3 times as long to process. So where a traditionally completed FAFSA might take a week to process, I've seen FAFSAs without parent signature take 3 to 4 weeks to process because you have to sign that paper, mail it in, they have to receive it, they have to verify the signature, and then they have to attach it, and then the FAFSA can be processed and sent out to the schools. So if at all possible, parents, and you have the ability to create an FSA ID, please do so because it limits the amount of time that this FAFSA is in processing limbo. But if you do not have a social security number, parents, then you're going to have to do the signature page. But I always recommend sign it, and the very next opportunity you have to put it in the mail, put it in the mail, and make sure that it's getting there as soon as possible. So actually, let's take a break. I've kind of talked about this a little bit, but let's recap real quick about the FSA ID. Again, it's an electronic signature. It's used to sign the FAFSA by the parent and the student, but the student also uses it to log in to the FAFSA. Now, there's several options, again, for you to create this. You can do it at studentaid.gov, but you can also do it right from the FAFSA. There are multiple opportunities to create an FSA ID leading into the FAFSA and within the FAFSA itself. And again, have to have a valid social security number, and the social security number that you use must match the name and date on file with the Social Security Administration. So if you have access to your Social Security card, parents, and if you have your student's Social Security card, make sure you are spelling the name exactly as it is on the Social Security card. Maybe your daughter's name is Catherine, or your son's name is Joseph, and they go by Cat and Joe. They don't want to be putting Cat and Joe in their FSA ID because those are not their legal names. So you have to make sure that it matches. If you have a hyphenated name and it's hyphenated on the Social Security card, you need to make sure it's hyphenated in the FSA ID, and vice versa. Because when you put your information in for your FSA ID and you submit it, you can use it right away while they're verifying it. You can use it to log into the FAFSA to sign the FAFSA. But if that FSA ID comes back as not verified, then you're not able to use it until you update that information. But all you have to do is log back into your FSA ID portal, change the incorrect information, resubmit it, and then wait for it to verify again. If you continually can't get it verified, that's when you call 1-800-4-FED-AID, and they'd be able to look into the issue for you. So as I've said, the student at the very least and one parent at the very least must have an FSA ID if that student is a dependent student. And again, 1-800-4-FED-AID if you need help overcoming issues with that. But we at Stand By Me can help you create that FSA ID. But we don't have access to be able to fix issues aside from helping you recover your password or your username, or maybe point out that, oh, that doesn't look right. So we're happy to help you create it and try to unlock it. But if all else fails, 1-800-4-FED-AID. And as I said, if you're a parent without a valid Social Security number, you're going to need to do the signature page as your way of signing your child's FAFSA. So once the FAFSA is signed and submitted, you're going to come to the confirmation screen, and it's going to give next steps. 3 to 5 days after the FAFSA is submitted, students should get that processed email that says FAFSA has been successfully processed. At that point, it makes its way to the colleges listed on the FAFSA, and at that point, you could go back in and add other schools or make other corrections. In 7 to 10 days, you're going to get something called the Student Aid Report. And the Student Aid Report, we're going to talk a little bit about more here in a second, is kind of a review of the FAFSA and what you've put in there, but we're going to see that on the next screen. If you have another child parent that is going to college at the same time as your high school senior when they start, so if you have 2 students going to college in the 21-22 year, you will be able to transfer your tax information and your demographic information over by clicking this option here on the right. Does your brother or sister need to complete a FAFSA? So it would take the student who needs to complete the FAFSA next. They would log in with their FSA ID, put in their information, but all of the parent information would be transferred over. So it can save you time on a second or third FAFSA. But you're only able to do it from this confirmation screen. If you move out, if you log out, you exit, you're not able to do that again, and you'd have to enter everything all over again. So that student aid report, again, in 7 to 10 days after the FAFSA has been processed, student is going to get a student aid report or a SAR in the mail. Now, it's designed for you to review what's in there and check all the information that you've entered in the FAFSA for accuracy. Now, there is a spot on the FAFSA before you submit it that you can go back through and review all of your information and try to catch any errors. But of course, some information you may have to estimate, especially if you're not able to use the data retrieval tool for the student or for the parent. So the SAR is designed for you to check the information for accuracy, update any estimated information, and update the school listing, and then submit it for corrections. But it's much faster and easier and more secure to log into the FAFSA, make corrections, and then resubmit it that way. It's going to be, again, a lot faster, a lot more secure, and the school is going to probably appreciate that you've done it electronically because it could be more accurate than doing it by paper. So as I said, we were going to take a look at really quickly dependent student but unable to provide parental data. We've already seen this screen where the student is going to answer, I am unable to provide information about my parents. Again, this is not because they don't have it at that moment or because they don't think they can get it or because mom and dad have refused to provide it. This is because there is a situation preventing the student from having contact with the parents. So if they click that, it's going to bring them here and pretty much say, are you sure that's what you want to do? Is that your final answer? As again, it tells them, now here's what's not an example of a special circumstance, and it's all the things that we've already talked about. So if they come down here, it kind of gives them a little bit of a warning that if you don't provide parental information and you don't have a special circumstance, you're only going to be eligible for an unsubsidized loan. But if the student truly has a special circumstance and cannot provide that information, they would click appropriately and then hit next. And again, the student would then, once their FAFSA is processed, need to reach out to each school on the FAFSA and say, I believe I have a special circumstance. What is your procedure for reporting it? And then the school would help them through that process. So some final comments. In summary, is money available? Absolutely. There are billions of dollars available in federal student aid, but students have to go out and apply for it, just like a lottery ticket. You want to win the lottery, you've got to buy a ticket. If you want money for college, you've got to go out there and find it, whether it's doing the FAFSA to get federal student aid, or whether it's researching scholarships to be able to get other forms of aid that you don't have to pay back. Money is out there, but you're going to have to work for it. So how much money is available, you ask? Well, students can receive financial aid in an amount up to what is called the cost of attendance, which would include tuition and fees, books and supplies, living expenses, whether they're on or off campus. And the cost of attendance is calculated by each school. So each school is going to have a different cost of attendance, which will be the most that it could cost a student. And so no one's going to get more financial aid than that. But the cost of attendance of a student at that school may be very different than what the overall cost of attendance is. But in any case, students cannot get more financial aid than it costs them to attend school. So we've talked about the different types of funding. I mentioned scholarships. We briefly mentioned grants. We looked at a little bit about work study, and then of course, student loans are part of the financial aid system. So how are we going to get this money? Again, at a minimum, you've got to be applying for admission to schools. You don't have to have applied to schools to start the FAFSA, and you don't have to be accepted to start the FAFSA or send a FAFSA. But If you send a FAFSA to a school and they don't have anything else on you via an admissions application, they're probably not going to be able to do anything with your FAFSA until you at least apply. And some schools, they can't do anything with your FAFSA until you've been accepted. So make sure that you're doing all of these things at the same time as soon as possible, because you can't get money for college unless you're going to college, and you can't get federal money for college unless you've done the FAFSA. And in some cases, there's scholarships that you're not going to be able to get unless you've done the FAFSA. And so when can you do this? I said as soon as possible. FAFSA has been open for a month now. So it's not too late. You haven't lost that much time, but you definitely want to make sure that you are getting on top of this, because some schools, such as University of Delaware, have much earlier financial aid deadlines than other schools do. And some of those schools have even earlier admission deadlines. So our checklist, what do we need to have to make this process smooth and then complete? Again, you've got to have those FSA IDs for the student at the very least, and potentially for at least one parent. Have to complete and submit the FAFSA. Everything's got to be completed on the FAFSA before you can submit it. You also want to make sure everything is correct and any estimated information is updated. So you want to do that as soon as possible at fafsa.gov. Once your FAFSA has been processed, you want to contact the financial aid office at each school that you've put on the FAFSA, whether it's one school or whether it's 20 schools. You want to contact each and every one of them. You're going to want to ask if there's any other materials, information, or processes needed to complete your financial aid journey. You're going to want to explain any special circumstances that you may have, whether it's you don't have contact with your parents and you weren't able to provide their information, or whether your parents have suffered a loss of income or job, or you've suffered the loss of a parent, or there's been divorce or what have you. Make sure that you're reaching out to the schools to fill them in on your situation. And then once the schools are sending financial aid offers, again, some schools might not be able to send you an offer until you have been accepted. But anytime you get an offer from a school, review it, make sure that it's a good offer, that it works for you and your family. And if you've received other offers from other schools, compare those offers to one another. You may be applying for a $20,000 a year public college and a $40,000 a year private college. And you're going to say, well, $40,000 a year school is a reach. It's out of our price range. We're probably never going to be able to afford it. But that expensive private college may have more money to give you as the student than the $20,000 a year public college. So at the end of the day, that private school may be less out of pocket than the public school. So make sure you are comparing financial aid offers when they are coming in. If you do need to apply for any federal loan funding, whether it's a traditional student loan or whether it's a Parent Plus student loan, which has much less of a ceiling on it, ask the financial aid office what the process is and what you're eligible for. Oh, I forgot to readjust that. Sorry about that. Continue researching and applying for privately funded scholarships. Also, make sure you're asking the financial aid office about institutional scholarships. What kind of aid can I get from the school itself? And then also ask, how are outside scholarships handled by the school, and does it affect any of my other financial aid if I get outside scholarships? And then if you're a Delaware student, whether you're going to a Delaware school or not, log on to DelawareStudentSuccess.org and create your Delaware Higher Education Office student account on the website, because it's going to open you up to a whole bunch of scholarship opportunities. And you can also check out the scholarship compendium on DelawareStudentSuccess.org and either look at the PDF version. You may have a paper version that was mailed to you, but you can also access their searchable version of the compendium and try to find scholarships that are intended for Delaware students, some who are going to Delaware schools and some who are going to schools out of state. Another helpful tool while we're thinking about finances is the net price calculator. Now, each school is likely going to have a net price calculator on their own website, but the federal government provides one at collegecost.ed.gov. It can help you figure out what is that school's cost of attendance, what kind of aid might I be eligible for, and how much might it cost me out of pocket, which will then give you a good idea about how much scholarship funding you may want to go for. At the same website, it's actually a landing page. Whichever website you type in, it's going to take you to a landing page. The college scorecard will help you determine if that school is worth the net cost that it's going to run you. So those are great tools to use in collaboration with one another to figure out what is school going to cost me and is it worth that much, and also how much aid might I be eligible for. Now, if at any time you have questions about individual college's process, whether it's admissions or financial aid, reach out directly to that staff. They are going to be the experts on their school. But you also have another great resource in your pocket, and that is your high school guidance counselor. They're going to be a really great resource on general college preparedness information, and they're also going to be a great repository for scholarships. Make sure you're asking your high school counselor about scholarships. They're going to know a lot about a lot of scholarships. Then there's a whole bunch of online resources. Fafsa.gov. Not only is it the application, but it also has other information on there that can be very helpful. It's also, again, where you can create your FSA ID, as well as at studentaid.gov. Studentaid.gov is going to be the holy Bible for federal student aid information. So any questions you have about any aid programs offered by the federal government, that's the place to go. Again, Delaware Student Success is a great resource for Delaware high school students, from scholarship searching to college research to preparedness checklists. Definitely check out DelawareStudentSuccess.org. And they're also offering their own Zoom events, be it college preparedness talks to virtual college tours. So make sure you're checking them out. If you're a military family, there may be GI Bill funding available for the student. So check out gibill.va.gov. And of course, you can check out standbymede.org. As I said, we are offering one-on-one Zoom appointments for free at a time that's convenient to you, where you can come and simply ask us questions. We can help you with an FSA ID. We can even help you complete the FAFSA from start to finish. And if we don't get done, we can always make another appointment. So check out standbymede.org and go to this portion of the website that says Stand By Me Next Gen College Funding Project. That's where you can go ahead and not only make an appointment with us for FAFSA completion, but you can register for one of our live presentations, whether it's the Paying for College, which is more of a general overview of the FAFSA, or whether it's our Scholarships 101 presentation, which is going to give you some really detailed and direct information about scholarships. So Paying for College begins today by learning about the FAFSA. So make sure you're ready to successfully start your journey. If you've got the right tools at the beginning, you're going to have a successful trip. Because again, money is available, but at the very least, you've got to file the FAFSA to get that money. So be strategic and start preparing now. Thank you for your time, and I hope that this was valuable to you. Again, if you have questions, call us at 211 or reach out at standbymede.org. Thank you.